All right. Well, hopefully you guys got some good things down. I just this is an exercise that my family that we did this week leading into Thanksgiving. So with my boys, I have two of my three sons that still live at home. And earlier this week, we sat down and we did that. We actually came up with 10 areas that we had them go through and write down 10 things in the 10 areas. The idea of being that we wanted them to be really thinking of 100 things that they had to be thankful for as we head into Thanksgiving. So I hope you guys enjoyed that exercise. I know for me it was great to when my wife and I first started talking about doing this with our boys. I was kind of like, wow, 100 things. Like I have a hard time at Morning Ascent coming up with 10 different things, over time. And so anyway, it was interesting though, because as we thought about, let's give them some different areas, like what I did for you guys today. It was amazing how quick and how easy it was for me to come up with 10 things in 10 areas when I identified some certain categories. So hopefully you guys had that same experience. And I just want you to know how grateful I am for you guys that you tuned in to listen to what I have to say. I sometimes feel like, what do I have to offer to these guys that would help them? So grateful that you are here and listening with me today. So here's what we're going to talk about. So today, as I thought about it for today, what I decided that I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about with you guys is actually, I'm not going to tell you yet. I'm first going to tell you a story. And then at the end of the story, then I'll tell you what that had to do with what we're going to talk about today. So let me start it with that. And my fear is if I tell you what we're going to talk about, that you might be like, oh, well, I'm hanging up then. I don't want to hear about that today. So I'm going to tell you the story first. Then from there, I'll tell you what we're going to talk about. So what you guys may or may not have known about me is my childhood dream in growing up was I wanted to be a fighter pilot. And so from when I was a young kid, I just had decided I wanted to be a pilot. Now, where that came from for me is I had two uncles that were pilots. One was a pilot in the Navy. The other one was an airline pilot. I mean, he had been in the Air Force, but he ended up being a captain for TWA, which a lot of you guys may or may not even remember TWA. TWA became Western Airlines, and if I'm remembering right, maybe it was just Western became Delta. Western became Delta, and I might be wrong on TWA, but doesn't matter. My one uncle flew as a captain of 747 for TWA. In fact, actually, and I hadn't even thought about this as part of the story, but interestingly enough, he actually was the pilot of a plane that got hijacked and they made him fly to Cuba. So anyway, interesting little side note there. But you would think that would have scared me from being a pilot, but it didn't. I wanted to become a fighter pilot. And so my dream was to become a fighter pilot. Well, what I didn't realize is if you want to become a fighter pilot, probably the easiest way to do that is to go through the Air Force Academy. Well, so I had this dream really that I was going to become a fighter pilot. My plan was after high school, I was going to go serve a mission for my church. So I went on a 2-year service mission for my church. And then when I got back from that, I was going to go join the Air Force Academy. Well, what I didn't know, and nobody ever told me and I didn't figure this out until it was about time. I was out of high school by the time I figured this out. I just assumed I would go and apply at the Air Force Academy and they would look at me and go, oh, you? Yeah, for sure. We'll take you to the Air Force Academy. And what I found out though, is if you want to get into the Air Force Academy, you have to start preparing for that at about the age somewhere between 12 and 14 years old is when you have to start doing it. And there are a lot of steps that you need to go through. Some of them being the part of getting into there is getting a senator to recommend you and things like that. Now, I'm probably not giving you all the details. Somebody might be on there and say, oh, no, that's not true. You got to do all this other stuff. But here's the point. There is a high bar that you have to meet in order to get into the Air Force Academy. And I just assumed that's what was going to happen. Well, when I found out that, hey, it wasn't that easy. And by the time I was 18 years old, it was too late to be trying to get into the Air Force Academy. When I realized that, I then thought, well, okay, I guess I won't become a fight. Well, actually, let me take that back. I had started dating my wife, and I told her, Well, the next route that I'm going to go through then is I'm going to join the Air Force, because if I join the Air Force, then I just assumed I could say I want to be a fighter pilot, and that the Air Force would go, oh, okay, yeah, that's what you want, perfect, that's what we're going to do. You'll get to be a fighter pilot. Well, my then girlfriend, now wife, and we were talking marriage at this point, and I told her, hey, here's the plan: is I am going to basically join the Air Force after we get married, and I'm going to try to become a fighter pilot. And she said, well, yeah, then that's not the life I want to live, so maybe you better go find somebody else to date. So now I had a decision to make. Okay, do I really want to be married to this gal, or do I want to be a fighter pilot? Well, she won out, and I decided, okay, I'll go my third best route then, which was I'm just going to go take flying lessons, and I'll just do it on my own that way. And so I went and just researched and found somebody that I could now go and learn how to fly with. So at the time I had researched it, I had found out it was going to cost me somewhere in the neighborhood back then of between $50 to $70 an hour, between paying the flight instructor and renting an airplane. Now, it's way more expensive than that today, I'm sure. I don't know what it is, but it looks like maybe Kyle knows. But way more expensive than that now. But at the time, it was going to be $50 to $70 an hour. Well, I was making $5 an hour. My wife was making like $5.50 an hour at the time when we got married. So we were now going to be spending 5 times basically our income per hour in order for me to start to fly. Well, I start taking these lessons, and part of the process when you are going to fly an airplane is before you take off, there is a pre-flight routine that you're going to go through where you're going to check out the plane to make sure, hey, once I get this thing in the air, is it going to stay up there, and am I going to be able to get it back down on the ground in a safe manner? And this guy that I had hired, now looking back on it, when I was calling around trying to find someone that I could learn to fly from, I was actually looking, because now keep in mind, between my wife and I, we were making like $10.50 an hour. I was trying to find somebody that was cheap that could teach me how to fly, and that's part of the story with this. Is so as I started to learn to fly, this guy, we would meet over at airport number 2 in West Jordan, for you guys that are in Utah, those in California, just one of the smaller airports. And this guy and I would go through the pre-flight routine. We would then jump in the plane and we would take off. Well, this one particular day we took off and we were flying around just over the Salt Lake Valley. And as we're flying around, all of a sudden he goes, uh-oh, we didn't check the fuel, and we don't have very much fuel left. I hope we can make it back to the airport. And I looked down then and noticed, yeah, we don't have very much fuel. Now, I wish I could say to you that that was something he had done on purpose to try to teach me a lesson. And maybe he did. But if he did, he was a really, really good actor, because I could feel the fear in him as we were flying back to the airport and getting back down on the ground. I could feel the fear. So I'm not sure that he really planned that. Now, I would love to say that he probably did, but I don't believe that he did. Now, as part of that, what you end up having to do, and I'm probably giving you guys way more detail than you need to get to my point of this, but as part of that, just to finish the story so that you know why I'm not an airline pilot today, is that you have to do a cross-country solo. And part of that is I did mine. I had to then fly. I flew to St. George, landed at the St. George airport, and then flew back home. Well, in the process of doing that, I had a brother-in-law that had gone this same route that I did, that was now working for SkyWest Airlines. And as I was flying to St. George and back, I kind of start realizing this is what being a pilot, an airline captain, is going to be like. Is essentially I'm sitting there while we're flying and just occasionally checking and making a few little adjustments. And I was like, I don't think this is something I want to enjoy doing for the rest of my life. And so I made the decision on that cross-country solo flying home that I'm not going to go that route. And when I got home and told my wife that, the mistake that I made is I told my wife that, and she said, we're not spending another penny for you to fly then if that's not going to be your career. And I should have waited. I only needed 8 more hours and I would have had my private pilot's license. So I should have waited to tell her, is the moral of the story for me. But okay, now let's go back to what does that have to do with what we're talking about? I want to talk to you guys today about pre-qualifying. In terms of when you are prospecting, the most important thing is going to be to set an appointment first off. Okay. So your number one objective when you are prospecting has got to be, I need to set an appointment. Now, once you set the appointment, or actually even before you set the appointment, here's what I see sometimes is sometimes what agents will do is they will start to figure out before they even have set the appointment with the person if they should be setting an appointment with them. And what I'm going to ask you to do is to not do that. First thing you want to do is just focus on, I am going to set an appointment. Now, once you have set the appointment with them, then you can move into now doing some pre-qualification. Now, in terms of that pre-qualification, I'm going to give you some recommendations that I follow. You may or may not want to do it the way that I'm recommending. But what I would say to you is if you are going to be meeting with them within 48 hours, 72 hours, something like that, I would recommend that you do your pre-qualifying right after you've set the appointment. So if you're going to be going out to meet with them in the next day or two, do your pre-qualify right then after you have set the appointment. So I've now set the appointment. I need to start asking them some questions to figure out. And ultimately, what we are trying to figure out when I am pre-qualifying somebody is I want to pre-qualify them to figure out, is there motivation there? Are they able to do it? So do they have the ability, and do they have the motivation behind doing it? So ultimately what I want to look for is the motivation to sell or buy and the ability to then sell or buy. So I want to ask these questions to figure it out. Now, here's the thing though. Most of the time when people are pre-qualifying, what I have seen is agents will pre-qualify with the idea being of what they end up trying to do is disqualify the person. So our purpose of pre-qualifying is not to disqualify, meaning we don't set the appointment then trying to figure out a way not to go on it. What we are doing is just asking the questions. Now we're asking these questions to figure out and to find out, do they have the motivation and do they have the ability? And from that, then I can determine what I need to know. And for newer agents, I would recommend go through all of that and then still go on the appointment. Even though you may figure out there's not really a lot of motivation or ability, for a new agent, I would recommend you still go on that appointment because what better way to practice than go get in front of a real potential buyer or seller? Now, as you get more experience, you will learn when, hey, no, that's a scenario that is probably not going to make sense for me to go out on it. But you need to determine that by having the experience that's going to develop within you that sixth sense to be able to know when you should or you shouldn't go out on that appointment. Now, the other purpose of us doing these pre-qualifying and asking questions is, which really is all pre-qualifying is, by the way, is asking questions to figure out what their motivation is and do they have the ability to go and do it. But as we are doing that, what's going to happen is that is going to create for us the ability to know what the objections are that they're going to have on a presentation when we get out there. When we get out there, what we will figure out is, hey, this person has some things that are going to be holding them back. Or they're going to be concerned about my commission, or they're going to be concerned about the price we're going to list their home on. All of those things enable you to then tailor your presentation in such a way is to get to them. I like to use the example is, in essence, think about a buyer presentation or a listing presentation, although I guess John this week said he hates that word, that conversation is what John said, right? That listing conversation or the buying conversation is really just about you asking the questions. Think of it like the game of Jeopardy. All the answers are on the board. We just have to figure out what the right question is. And that is the same thing I would say in terms of you going out and doing this listing or this buyer presentation, is you are needing to just ask enough of the questions that what will happen is that the buyer will then give to you everything you need to know, or the seller will give to you everything you need to know in order to go and give a presentation, or again, as John said, a conversation with them in such a way that you become the very best agent for them because of the questions that you've asked. So just think of it that way, is really all pre-qualifying is asking enough questions to figure out what is important to them and figuring out if you are the right person to then help them in getting their home sold or buying a home. Now, my oldest son did well in who he married. She's a great, awesome person. She also just graduated from medical school and is going to become a psychiatrist. So she has a medical degree from the University of Utah. And I was talking to her and was asking her questions about what they teach them in terms of when they go in to meet with a patient. And she actually gave me a printout that, and I wasn't planning to talk about this part of it. It just hit me, or I would have brought it to show you. But she gave me a printout that they have that is designed that basically is a way for them to pre-qualify a patient, if you wanted to think about it that way. Is in essence, they've got these questions that they just go through and they ask, which is allowing the doctor to pre-qualify you to figure out how to best prescribe the right medicine for you. Think about it that way. When you're meeting with a buyer or you're meeting with a seller, all we are doing is trying, before this pre-qualifying, is figuring out what's the prescription that we should give to that buyer or that seller. The same as what a doctor does. See, too many times, and I'm even guilty of this, I will refer to what we do as our industry, but really, as agents, this is a profession. We are professionals, just the same as what a doctor would be, or a dentist, or an attorney, or since I talked about airline pilots, like those type of things. We are a profession. We're not an industry. We are a profession, and we should act like professionals, which mean we ask these questions beforehand so that we know how to best prescribe to our patient. Now, unfortunately, sometimes the prescription we may have to give to this buyer or seller is, I am sorry to give you this news, but you're in stage 4, you're dead. Now, I don't mean that. That probably was bad to say that. I apologize. But ultimately, I can't help you. There's nothing I can do for you. And just like a doctor sometimes has to say that, we may have to do that with a client sometimes, of saying, hey, what you're wanting to do is just not going to be realistic. I was talking with an agent this week that had a client that he went out and showed this guy multiple properties. And every time he would go to a property, it was a 90-minute showing. So he would spend 90 minutes in the house. He finally gets this buyer under contract. They would schedule 3 times this happened, gets the buyer under contract. And then before doing the actual inspection, he did a 3-hour pre-inspection where the buyer would go and check out the house for 3 hours before the home inspector even got there to do their inspection. And then all 3 times ended up canceling the deal along the way. See, sometimes we have to come and figure out, I'm not the agent for you. And so what this agent did is just said, I'm not the agent for you anymore. I'm not putting any more time in this because these are great houses and you're finding reasons that you're going to cancel. And so that's what we're trying to avoid, is my point, is we got to figure out, is the motivation there and do they have the ability to do it? Well, hopefully you've learned something about pre-qualifying. Hopefully you are going to commit to doing a little bit better in terms of your pre-qualifying. Ask a few more questions to really find out the motivation and the ability. And then from there, know how to go in and tailor this conversation or this presentation to a buyer or a seller that allows you to help them get what it is they want. All right. Well, thanks for being with me, guys. Have an awesome Thanksgiving. Just a reminder that, so tomorrow, with being Thanksgiving, we're not going to do a morning ascent. Same with Friday. The offices are closed. And so no morning ascent. So we'll be back with you on Monday, ready to rock and roll, and make it an awesome day and have an awesome Thanksgiving, especially in this year where we've had so much to be fearful about. Make sure you really get into that space of gratitude. Let's close